Good morning. It's great to be out with you all this morning. I'm looking forward to this week and very thankful for the opportunity to be with you all. Trying to meet as many of you as I can. I know I didn't get around to everybody, but just to introduce myself, my name's Jacob Taylor. I did preach, as was said, at the Northern Kentucky Church of Christ in Florence, and of course, very valuable. It sounds like you know very good amount of them and valuable resources that Greg and Vicki are, and Renee is constantly traveling the world and seeing amazing things. And so there's obviously the connections in which we have. So I'm excited to be here and thankful for the opportunity. This morning, and we're going to start with really an introduction to our series and looking at the power of perspective. Really just an introduction of what this means. As the goal with the lessons this week is to align ourselves with how God views various aspects of life, whether that be ourself, whether that be others, whether that be trials, whether it be sin, self-control, the desires in which we have, all of these things, wanting to make sure that we look and perceive things in the way in which God perceives them. This has been something that has fascinated me for a long time, the idea of being able to look at something, and for all of us, be able to look at something and be able to see it completely different. There's those pictures that you may see from time to time. There's two images that you can see in a picture. And at first you may see, let's say, a rabbit, and then another person may see a bird, and then the other one has to explain, well, this is where the eye is of the rabbit, or this is the wing of the bird. You see these amazing things. Just we can look at something and perceive it in two different ways. And for us as children of God, wanting to make sure that we perceive as our Lord has instructed us to perceive. For example, with this being a Bible class, I encourage you, if you have thoughts, or I'll be asking questions, so feel more than welcome to speak up. Is with this picture behind me, what would you call that? Yeah, dandelion, right? Just a dandelion. For most people, are going to look at that and may even get annoyed by that. As, I have to go spray that, I have to go deal with these, I don't like these dandelions, I don't like these weeds, right? Just even the sight of it might make us annoyed. But for some, and namely my sister, when she was little, would call those wishing flowers. And we'll get excited when you see them. Pick them up and you blow them and they go flying everywhere. Two very different things, very different perceptions of them, the exact same thing. And what an amazing thing that can be. Rain, very similar. We may see rain, may even sing a song for it to go away. But you have that for some, like namely a gardener as an example, is going to see that and is going to be joyful over it raining. Why? They see the benefits in it. It's the same thing. And that's what I want to talk about this morning and really throughout this week is making sure that we're looking at things like God is. That we may perceive things differently from time to time, but to look at them as God does. We'll look at, if you go over to Numbers chapter 13, that's where we're going to be focused in our time this morning. Numbers chapter 13, where you have an amazing story of 12 individuals in particular, but many more involved, of course, in the story that saw or heard events in which all the people saw or heard, and yet the reactions are all over the place. And namely, we really focus on two individuals that actually view the situation with God in the picture. Moses, we'll get to, does as well when you see his words in Deuteronomy chapter 1. But namely, we're going to see that it's Joshua and Caleb that have this perspective that we want to make sure we imitate. In Numbers chapter 13, in verse 1, we see that God tells Moses to send out spies into the land of Canaan, which God is going to give to the Israelites, and he's going to have them send one member of each tribe there. 10 of those names are probably not as familiar as 2 of them, of course. The spy from the tribe of Judah and spy from the tribe of Ephraim are probably the familiar ones with Caleb and Joshua. We'll see Joshua is mentioned as the name Joshua in verse 16 of this chapter. And you have the mission that is given to them begins in verse 17. In verse 17 through 20 is the mission, if you will, what the spies are going to go and do. There be anyone that would like to read those verses 17 through 20?
Then Moses sent them up to spy out the land of Canaan, and said to them, go up this way into the south, and go up to the mountains, and see what the land is like, whether the people who dwell in it are strong or weak, few or many, whether the land they dwell in is good or bad, whether the cities they inhabit are like camps or strongholds, whether the land is rich or poor, and whether there are forests there or not. Be of good courage, and bring some of the fruit of the land. Now the time was the season of the first ripe grapes.
Outstanding. Thank you very much. So very clear that there's a lot of things in which they're to go and do, but focused in getting into the land, seeing what the land is like, seeing what the people are like. All of these things in which they go do. And for the next 40 days, that's what they go and do. We know it was 40 days from verse 25. They return after the end of 40 days. That number 40 will unfortunately come to be very important later on in this story. But they go out for these 40 days, and they see the land in verse 21 through 22. In verse 23 and 24, they find some fruit in which they're going to take back, and they carried it on a pole between two men. And they get back in verse 26, and they begin to speak. And if verse 27 was the only thing they would have said, if they would have just stopped talking there, how good it would have been. But we see that verse 28 and 29 is really the downfall of this report. Verse 27 reading says, "So they reported to him and said, 'We came into the land where you have sent us, and it certainly does flow with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. Nevertheless, the people who live in the land are strong, and the cities are fortified and very large. And indeed, we saw the descendants of Anak there. Amalek is living in the land of the Negev, the Hittites, the Jebusites, the Amorites are living in the hill country, and the Canaanites are living by the sea and by the side of the Jordan.'" You have even them acknowledging that these people are a formidable opponent. It's not something that is wrong by any means. These are formidable opponents. These are people from a fleshly point of view alone are rather intimidating individuals. Certainly those that are of great stature, as we learn in verse 33, how those can be rather intimidating. And they respond in such this fear in which you have. Caleb speaks up and interrupts, if you will, in verse 30. You can see that he has to quiet the people. So you see the people's reaction initially, of course, before we even see what they say, is a response of Caleb has to, let's calm down, quiet down, and tells them, and notice the confidence in his words when saying, "We should by all means go up and take possession of it, for we will certainly prevail over it." There's confidence in that in which he says. But then you get to the words being spoken by the people again. In verse 31, you see confidence on the other side. "We are not able to go up against the people because they are too strong for us. So they brought a bad report of the land which they spied out to the sons of Israel, saying, 'The land through which we have gone to spy out is a land that devours its inhabitants. And all the people whom we saw in it are people of great stature. We also saw the Nephilim there. The sons of Anak are part of the Nephilim. And we were like grasshoppers in our own sight, and so we were in their sight.'" Grasshoppers. You see this view that they've had amongst themselves now. We're going to get to this later on in our Bible class, in the sermon after the class, and focusing on perception of self. You see how they view themselves to be like grasshoppers. So an amazing thing in this difference of perspective. They look at this, the people, the 10 spies, look at this and have no confidence in it. You look at Joshua, he's going to come into the picture, of course, with Caleb, as we're told Joshua is speaking in verse 6 through verse 10. And you have great confidence in those words as well. They'll say, and this is verse 7, "The land which we passed through to spy out is an exceedingly good land. If the Lord is pleased with us, then he will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land which flows with milk and honey. Only do not rebel against the Lord. Do not fear the people of the land, for they will be our prey. Their protection is gone from them, and the Lord is with us. Do not fear them." Great confidence that is there. You look in Deuteronomy chapter 1, when Moses is retelling of this event, you'll find the people referred to that saying that God has brought us out here because he hates us. That's the perspective amongst the people here. That's what they say. They talk about this report of these 10 spies has caused our hearts to melt. What a great and amazing picture that presents. But you see with Joshua and Caleb, it's amazing again. These 12 spies went and saw the exact same thing. They saw the exact same people. They saw the exact same land, the same fruit. They were part of bringing that back. They saw all of it together. So what happened? How do we get into this mess where there's these opinions all over the place? You have the people are just so distraught, and this is it. In chapter 14 and verse 1, they raise their voices and cry out and they weep all night. As they often do, they talk about, if we had just stayed in Egypt, it would have been better if we died in Egypt than if we had have come out here. Verse 3, why has the Lord brought us into the land to fall by the sword? It would be better for us to return to Egypt. And they talk about appointing a leader. Moses, like I said, speaks in Deuteronomy chapter 1 around this portion in time. So it's amazing. You think about, when you look at verse 10, for Joshua and Caleb, the way the people perceive them, what do they want to do to those two? Stone them. So the only two the two of the three that have the correct view, the rest of the people, we need to stone them. Moses, of course, you don't see it as much in Numbers, but in Deuteronomy chapter 1 you do, has a proper perspective of this as well. And they're talking about replacing him in verse 4. So you have these three individuals that have the right attitude. Two of them they want to kill, and one of them they want to replace. What's the separation here? I think the big separation there is the word fully that you see with Caleb. It comes up rather often with his story. And it's powerful that God is the one who says it. In Numbers 14 and verse 24, when God is speaking and talking about what is going to happen to the people as a result of their actions, he speaks about Caleb and says, but as for my servant Caleb, because he has had a different spirit and has followed me fully, I will bring him into the land which he entered, and his descendants shall take possession of it. That's God speaking there. You go over into Joshua chapter 14, you'll find in verse 8 that Caleb will refer to himself as following God fully. Verse 9, he'll mention Moses said it as well. Caleb was one who followed God fully. What do you think that means, to follow God fully, at least in the context of the story of Caleb? What might that mean, to follow fully?
To obey completely.
Yeah, to obey completely. That's an excellent answer. It really is that simple, to just be obedient. You have the people, these other people, the 10 spies and the congregation there, they believed in God in terms of believed in his existence. They'll talk about and refer to God brought us out here, but has brought us out here to die. They believed in his existence, but they did not believe in the sense of the ability of what he can do. They did not bring all the things that he had done for them, all the plagues that he had put on Egypt, all the things and people that he had leading them out of Egypt, the way in which he's taking care of them. They don't take that and apply it into their present circumstances. They don't apply it in that way. But you see Joshua and Caleb and Moses, they do. They apply it into God was with us in these situations. God has provided in these situations. And this is going to be no different. As Joshua and Caleb pointed out in chapter 14, verse 7 through 10, if God is pleased with us, he will give us this land. He's able to do so. The need to follow fully, to be able to take and to apply what God has done, and to apply it into the present and current situations of life. And this happens repeatedly in the story of the Israelites. You have, if you go over to Hebrews chapter 3 with me, we come back to Numbers. But Hebrews chapter 3 speaks of this generation. And even going into chapter 4, speaks of this generation and talks about these very people that do not enter into God's rest. We'll come back to these verses, namely verse 12 through 14, a few different times in our study and time together this week, Lord willing. Verse 12 has a great emphasis on making sure that we're looking out for each other, that we are not making sure that none comes to have an evil, unbelieving heart that falls away from the living God. Verse 13 gives us the action. Verse 12 is what we are looking for. Verse 13, this is what you do so that it does not happen. And that's encourage. Encourage each other as long as it's called today. So daily encouragement. Not even on Sunday alone or Wednesday alone. Daily is emphasized. Verse 14 talks about we are partakers of Christ and we keep the beginning of our commitment firm until the end. It has to continue. It has to persevere until the end. But then verse 16 through 19, you have verses that are absolutely directly focused on this generation we're talking about in Numbers. It reads, "For who provoked him when they had heard? Indeed, did not all those who came out of Egypt led by Moses? And with whom was he angry? For 40 years. Was it not those who sinned, whose dead bodies fell in the wilderness? And to whom did he swear that they would not enter his rest, but to those who were disobedient? And so we see that they were not able to enter because of unbelief." Not able to enter because of unbelief. They saw these things. They experienced these things. And yet you see, because of their unbelief, because of their faith, their lack of faith, where in application of God has done these things, we have seen his power in bringing it into the present situation, you have the result of they don't enter into the rest. Whereas Joshua and Caleb, you see a remembrance of what God has done. You see them looking at this story and actually seeing God in the picture of it. They all believed in God in the sense of believing in his existence. But you have three individuals, and really focusing on two, in Joshua and Caleb, that believed and believed faithfully and fully. And what an important point to take away, to be those kind of people. To be the Joshua and Calebs that we need to be. Are there any thoughts or any questions that anyone may have?
Down in Numbers 14, verse 22, says, "Because all these men have seen my glory and the signs which I did in Egypt and in the wilderness, and have put me to the test now these 10 times."
Mm-hmm.
Already tested by 10 times up to this point.
Yes. Yes, that's an excellent point. This isn't just the first time that this has been an issue. And that's one of the reasons I put Exodus 14 through 17 on there, is you have, going back to the beginning of leaving Egypt, you have this constant cycle of them coming to a new present challenge. And it's almost as if, do you not remember what God just did? Just a few moments ago, it seems like, from us at least reading it, it wasn't necessarily that way in the chronological time period. But the way in which we read it, we go from, like in chapter 14, they're exiting out of Egypt, they're going, and they see the Egyptians. And what was their reaction when they saw the Egyptians? When they were chasing after them, if you remember.
They thought they were going to die.
Yeah, they thought they were going to die. I mean, they were being led by God in a pillar of cloud by day, a pillar of fire by night. They had already come to know about the plagues there. And then when they see the Egyptians come after them, they talk about and tell Moses, "We told you to leave us alone. We told you to leave us alone. It would have been better for us to stay in Egypt and be servants there." And did they forget about all the plagues that God just did and he got them out? Yet you see there again, of course, that you see that they pass through on the sea on dry ground. God's power in that. They get across in Exodus 15. Most of that chapter is a song of praise to God, of joy and thankfulness for what God has done. But the end of chapter 15, you have that now they're thirsty again. Or, well, I should say for the first time. We'll see this comes up again. But they're thirsty. They're thirsty because the water in which they found was bitter. And they begin to complain and cry out against Moses. And there's a tree that is shown by God to Moses that makes that water from being bitter to sweet. And they drink that water. You go to chapter 16. They begin to complain. And complain now because they're hungry. Now we're hungry. And they mention that they wished that they had died in Egypt. That's what hungry they are. Makes me smile when I read it. They talk about all the meat pots in Egypt. I miss the meat pots in Egypt. At least we had food. I mean, we were brutally treated, but at least we had the meat pots, is what they talk about. And yet you see that God provides for them again in giving them manna. And we may even look, and how could you have seen all these things and forgot? Is what we seem to think as a reader. You go into chapter 17, they're thirsty again. And they're complaining again, grumbling again. And you're like, do you not remember what just happened with the water and the tree? And that's when Moses strikes the rock as he was supposed to. I know that he does the opposite of that later on. But you see this time and time and time again of this repeated action of them coming to a new challenge. And instead of bringing up in remembrance of what God had done and bringing that into the present, you see there's not a response of that so often. I think we can be really good as readers of identifying that. Or we can be really good at doing that with the apostles sometimes. Where we're like, how in the world could they not? I mean, Jesus told them point blank, this is what's going to happen 3 times. And they don't seem to get it. The Pharisees, things like that. We're very good at pointing these things out about them and their error. But do we do the exact same thing? Here, when we think about this example of the fact that they had seen these things, they had seen and experienced God's power, and then come to a new challenge, and all of a sudden it's like that had never happened in their minds. Do we do the same thing? Where we come into a new situation, a new challenge, a new temptation, whatever that may be or look like, and we forget. We don't apply. We don't remember the God that did this for me, the God that woke me up this morning when he didn't have to do that, the God who provided food on the table when he did not have to do that, the God who healed me or my loved one from an illness. All of these things, and to bring it forward. It's such a root issue with the Israelites. It's easy to identify as a reader, but do we do the same thing? Do we do the same thing? Do we, as Paul writes in 2 Corinthians 5 and verse 7, walk by faith and not by sight? The Israelites that we're studying in our class period are a classic example of walking by sight. They're walking by sight, how they feel in the moment, what they see. They notice when they're hungry, they're thirsty. It's what they feel. They're fearful. And they just jump into those emotions, and then that carries them into saying the things that they should not say. And then, of course, they get provided for, and everything's fine for a little bit. And then we go, and it just happens again, happens again. You see that namely with the story of the book of Judges almost as a whole. As you have this continual thing of the book of Judges of that they go into sin, and of course they get themselves in trouble. They call out to God. God brings a judge. There's some peace for a little bit, and then it starts over again. And it happens time and time again. Are we taking what God has done and applying it to our present situations? Are we remembering what he has done? You have Joshua and Caleb. They saw God's goodness, just as these other people did. But there's a present application which they have. That's how you get this difference in perspective. That's how you get it. We have to bring God into all things, into everything that we go into, to look and to see a situation and know the God of the Bible, the only one true God who's done all these things and has worked in my life, is active today as he is in all lives of his people. He's able. And this is how we're going to get these different perspectives, these Christ-like perspectives that we're talking about now and, of course, talking about this week as we continue on, Lord willing. Is there any thoughts or any comments or questions? Yeah.
Children of Israel at this time, they gave a whole new perspective to the word wine.
Mm-hmm.
Usually we think of that from children's perspective, adults.
Mm-hmm. Right. Right. And I think when you think about like in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, where it talks about these mistakes are written for our benefit as Christians, to think about, we better not replicate these things. You think about it, I mean, for them, they didn't have to get to go to the book of Numbers or Exodus and look, oh, these people did those things. They were living it. Like, we get that example. How much more foolish are we if we have that example right in front of us and then do the exact same thing in application? So important, of course, to learn from their faults. Any other thoughts? So to emphasize more about the need to remember, and specifically remembering what he has done, I want to look at what we see with Joshua, namely, before he goes out and becomes the spy in which he does and has the report in which he has. If you go to Exodus chapter 17, you have that there's a group of people in which is the new opponent here. And it's going to sound a familiar name because it's Amalek. Keep in mind, Amalek was one of the people that was mentioned in Numbers 13 as one of the sources of why the Israelites can't go in. So Joshua is involved in this story here. In verse 9, he's told by Moses to choose men for him, for us, the Israelites, and go out and fight against Amalek. Tomorrow I will station myself on the top of the hill with the staff of God in my hand. Normally with this story, we focus on the amazing point of Moses in his hands, and deservedly so. I'm not saying that shouldn't be the case. Of Moses holding his hands up, and when that was the case, victory would be, Israel would be winning. When his hands were down, Amalek would begin to prevail. And you have Aaron and Hur in verse 12 as being supports under the hands of Moses. But Joshua is involved in this. In verse 13, it says that Joshua defeated Amalek and his people with the edge of the sword. And then verse 14, the thing is very interesting. Then the Lord said to Moses, write this in a book as a memorial and recite it to Joshua, that I will utterly wipe out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. I think that's interesting. To tell this to Joshua. Joshua experienced it. When you talk about he was literally in the front lines, he experienced it. But Moses is told by God to write this down, recite it to Joshua. I think it's amazing that these people of Amalek come up again in Numbers 13 with the spies in the report. And Joshua had this opportunity to look what we've already done against these people by the power of God. This has already happened. Application to make forward. That God was with us in this situation against this exact same people, and there's no reason this won't be any different. Joshua saw God's power and made application. In Exodus 33 and in verse 11, you see much of the same attitude with Joshua. In Exodus 33 is when God would go and speak to Moses in the tent, in the tent of meeting. And this is something that not just Joshua was involved in. It's very clear that all the other people saw them. Verse 8 mentions, all the people would arise and stand each at the entrance of his tent and gaze after Moses until he entered the tent. This is not a Joshua-only thing. This is something all the people are able to see. And then verse 9, you imagine placing yourself in this picture to see Moses going into the tent and the pillar of cloud descending and standing at the entrance of the tent, and the Lord would speak with Moses. You have, of course, that when it was done, they would go back to their tent. But verse 11, you find there's somebody that's a little different than everyone else. And that's Joshua. When Moses returned to his camp, his servant Joshua, the son of Nun, a young man, would not depart from the tent. Joshua, uniquely pointed out there. Other people knew and had the same opportunity to see the things Joshua did, and they did see them. But you see a different attention with Joshua. So when we get to Numbers 13, we know, we obviously don't know Joshua as full as we'll get to yet, namely in the book of Joshua, but we know the kind of man that he is. And the application to then this present situation of, yes, the spies are out here, these enemies we see are out here. This land is formidable. This land is something that is full of intimidating people. I mean, God talks about, it's mentioned in the book of Deuteronomy, that these people are too strong for the Israelites in terms of it's without God. If it's just the Israelites, just versus the people in the land, they are stronger. But with God, it's no competition. There's no debate about it. God was very clear, I will give you this land. And we'll get to that in just a second. When we apply this, what are we remembering today? What are we bringing forth to remember what the Lord has done for us? And I think most important is, of course, that he's rescued us from sin, as you see in Ephesians. Ephesians chapter 2, verse 1 through 3 illustrates the state in which we all were once in, of being dead in sin, and a state that some can still be in, of course, if they have not rendered obedience to the Lord. But you have verse 4. The first two words of that verse, at least in the New American Standard, are "but God." I find that those two words there are so powerful to me, just because you can sum up the entire Bible nearly in those two words. This is God made the world. This is what humans did. We brought about sin, but this is what God has done. We've done this, but this is what God has done. And it's over and over and over. But God. He's the one who was rich in mercy in verse 4. Because of his great love with which he loved us, even when we were dead in our wrongdoings, made us alive together with Christ. By grace you have been saved. That grace will be talked about as being rich as well. In chapter 1, verse 7, the riches of his grace which he lavished on us. There's a great emphasis in the beginning of the first two chapters of Ephesians in value of what God has given us. His rich grace that he's lavished on us. His great love. His rich mercy. These are the things that he's given to us. And to remember that as we continue on in our lives. Psalm 77 is a powerful example of this as well. The psalmist here uses the word remember rather often in the verses we're going to look at. And he's in a difficult time. We're not going to take the time to read verses 1 through 11 for the sake of time this morning. But you have that he's in a very difficult situation. And yet at the same time, you have what he notices and what he remembers in the presence of those things. Can I get a reader for verse 11 through 20?
I will remember the works of the Lord. Surely I will remember your wonders of old. I will also meditate on all your work and talk of your deeds. Your way, O God, is in the sanctuary. Who is so great a God as our God? You are the God who does wonders. You have declared your strength among the peoples. You have with your arm redeemed your people, the sons of Jacob and Joseph. The waters saw you, O God, the waters saw you, they were afraid. The depths also trembled. The clouds poured out water. The sky sent out a sound. Your arrows also flashed about. The voice of your thunder was in the whirlwind. The lightnings lit up the world. The earth trembled and shook. Your way was in the sea, your path in the great waters, and your footsteps were not known. You led your people like a flock by the hand of Moses and Aaron.
Excellent. Thank you. What are some of the things that were mentioned there that the psalmist calls to mind? What were some of those things there?
It says the clouds poured out water. So it's supposed to rain.
Yes. Yes, the rain, the power God has over the waters there. You have in verse 11, he remembers the deeds of God, the ones he's done of old. He meditates on them. In verse 12, he refers to a God who does wonders in verse 14, remembers God's leadership, references, of course, verse 20, which will be very powerful connection to what we've been talking about with the Israelites, and that God led the people by the hand of Moses and Aaron. He's calling back these things to mind in the presence of his own difficulty in verse 1 through 11. That I know these things, but I remember who my God is. And with this point, it's hard not to go to the story that involves a lion, a bear, and a giant, which is, of course, David and Goliath. In 1 Samuel chapter 17, where you have David's situation of he makes a connection very clearly, voices it to Saul very clearly of, I understand that I have come up against this lion, I have come up against this bear, And Goliath may be the next, but it doesn't matter that Goliath is next because God is there. Oftentimes you hear in sports, if you watch sports, and you have, namely in like March Madness, when it's a 1 seed versus 16, you'll have people say it's David versus Goliath. It's David versus Goliath. And the Goliath is the 1 seed, they're the top ranked team, and the David is the 16, it's the lowest ranked team. Goliath had no chance to win. No chance at all. Not because David was great at throwing rocks, not because David was so good at any of these things, because his faith was in God. Goliath had no chance because God was there. No chance. Goliath may have been huge. He may have had these amazing tools of warfare. And he was a champion. That's often overlooked, I think, with Goliath. He was a big dude. He was also the best. He was a champion. But he stood no chance because of God. You have in verse 17, verse 37 of chapter 17. David said, "The Lord who saved me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear, he will save me from the hand of this Philistine." God will do this. He even voices to Goliath when Goliath looks at him and Goliath talks about, "Am I a dog that you've come to me with sticks?" And what is this? That we've waited all these days. I've been waiting for an opponent, and this is finally what you put out in front of me? Is Goliath's attitude. And what did David say in verse 45? "You come to me with a sword and a spear and a saber, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of armies, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied." He'll get to saying, as we sing oftentimes, "For the battle belongs to the Lord," in verse 47. The connections that were made by David into a present situation, remembering what God has done and applying it to a present situation, and to do the same with what he has said. I want to go over those chapters in Exodus and read them. If you would turn back over to Exodus. That first passage, it's Exodus 23 in verse 23. But think about, again, the nations that were told, or the people, when the spies go, again, remember, they mentioned people that were in the land. I want you to notice when we look at these verses, some of those same people are mentioned by God in relation to, "I'm going to give you the land." So when they walk into the land, the spies, they don't walk in and it's the people there we've never heard of. We've never heard of these people. We've never had any concept of them. God had told them already, told the people as a whole, "I'm going to give you this land. I'm going to give the land of these people to you." He had told them multiple times. And yet you see their reaction when they get into the situation was, "Oh, this is it. We're going to die. We have no chance." It's amazing. In chapter 23, verse 23, God, it says, "Therefore my angel will go before you and bring you into the land of the Amorites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Canaanites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, and I will completely destroy them." Those places sound familiar. Those people sound familiar because they're said in Numbers 13. You go to Exodus 33, you see much of the same. In verses 2 through 3, God's saying that I will drive out the Canaanite, Amorite, Hittite, Perizzite, the Hivite, and the Jebusite. I'm going to do this. Chapter 34 and verse 11, much of the same. He told them that he was going to do these things in relation to those exact people. And yet you see, obviously not every single one of Numbers 13 is mentioned in that list of the verses we see in Exodus. But the point being, God told them. And they don't remember. You don't see the majority of the people going, "Well, don't you remember what God told us? Don't you remember that he said that he was going to give us these people's land? That he was going to drive them out completely?" You don't see them doing that. Joshua and Caleb, you see them making that application. But you don't see that amongst these people. Something to learn. When we come into a present situation of a challenge or just something that's not even necessarily challenging, just something that we're walking into, do we look at it and remember this is what God has said? This is what God has said, and apply it into the present moment. That I remember God has said in His Word. We'll talk about temptation later on in the week. When Satan in Matthew chapter 4 and Luke chapter 4 was tempting Jesus, what did Jesus keep going back to? It's the Word. It is written. It is written. What a powerful example. The Son of God did that. Who am I to not do that as well? To come into a situation and to look, and I remember that God has said in His Word. That's what the Israelites had the opportunity to do. I remember God said that He was going to give us these people's land. But they didn't. Something, of course, to learn from. To make sure that we apply truth before our feelings. Sometimes we run into our emotions, and that can carry us far down the line. And we just don't even get to really think. We don't slow down and think. You just get so far into the emotion. And feelings, emotions, they're God-given things. God acts on them. But we need to keep the truth in mind. Of that God has said these things, and that I may be scared. I may be fearful. But I know who is greater. I know what He has said. An important application to learn from these people is to continue to walk by faith and not by sight. You have as well to keep these verses in mind, like Hebrews 13 verse 5 and the ones listed there, that God is not going to abandon His people. Philippians 4, 6 through 8, that we have no need to be anxious because we can give those requests to God and have the peace which surpasses all comprehension. And in the absence of giving those anxieties to God, verse 8, this is what you fill your mind on. You fill your mind on things that are true and commendable, and the other things listed in that verse. That we remember to love our neighbor as ourselves and to love our enemies, as Jesus says. Application to be made. To take those things and bring them into our current moment. To offer one more example, if you go to 2 Chronicles with me for just a second, in chapter 14, and then we'll look in chapter 16. You have King Asa here. If you only read his story in 1 Kings, you don't pick up on this. So it's important to read, of course, both accounts, because 2 Chronicles lays out more about Asa's story. And Asa in chapter 14 and chapter 15 is remarkable. He's remarkable in his faith. Sometimes we'll say, I feel like I have a million things going against me. I have a million things going on. We may just say that. You look at verse 9. For Asa, that was true. He literally had an army of 1 million people against him. 1 million people. Verse 11, what did he say? Lord, there was no one besides you to help in the battle between the powerful and those who have no strength. Help us, Lord our God, for we trust in you and your name and have come against this multitude. Lord, you are our God. Do not let man prevail against you. The point of we need God. Asa didn't run to, I got to get 1 million people myself then. Or I got to go run to another nation and they got to come help me. You don't see him doing that in chapter 14. You see him, God is able. And that next verse, God gave the victory. Unfortunately, you get to chapter 16, and you find Asa has a new challenge. And it's the king of Israel is essentially making a blockade against him, as you see in verse 1 of that chapter. We may look at Asa and think, okay, we just saw what he did in chapter 14. He's, of course, going to call out to God and say, God, please help us. But that's not what Asa does. Asa goes off to the king of Aram by the name of Ben-Hadad and wants him to make a treaty with him and break the treaty that he had made with the king of Israel. And the king of Aram listens. And in terms of the conflict being over, it went well in that way. In verse 5 and 6, Israel left. But then a prophet comes to speak to Asa and talks about in verse 7, because you relied on the king of Aram, have not relied on the Lord your God. For that reason, the army of the king of Aram has escaped from your hand. This could have been a much greater victory. Much greater. Of not just Israel walking away, Aram would have been dealt with. But because you ran to Aram for help instead of running to God, this is your situation. Verse 8, he calls to mind that exact story read in chapter 14. Do not remember these things. In verse 9, it points at certainly, keep in mind, a powerful verse. For the eyes of the Lord roam throughout the earth, so he may strongly support those whose heart is completely his. This is true then as it is today. To keep in mind that God is present and that he is able, just as we see in the Bible numerous amount of times. Are there any thoughts or any questions anyone may have? How am I doing on time? We are up? Okay, well then good, because I'm done. So very good. Well, we'll go ahead and thank you all for your participation and thoughts. Thank you.